beginning the stages of spirituality, and it's actually going to be in two parts. I have really asked myself why or how over and over again, especially in the past 4 years, as it relates to people who identify as Christians or people of faith. What they believe or do or align themselves with or allow or dismiss in the interest of us choosing this path of rehumanization, like we talked about last week, as opposed to dehumanization. Understanding the stages of faith really can give us some clarity, some insight as to why people do what they do. Now, it doesn't change the situation with all the insanity we have in our world, but it can change how we relate to it. And it can also hold a mirror up to us in ways that can challenge us to keep growing spiritually. So, stages of faith, part one. Now, there have been multiple schools of thought on developmental intelligences. So I'm going to take a look first at Jesus, Yeshua, as our example. This is a very well-known verse. It says, and Yeshua grew, and that Greek word for grew is the word prokopto, and it means to beat forward, to lengthen out by hammering. So this word for grow is if you get this image where there's something beating a piece of metal in order to make it go out. Metaphorically, it means to promote or move forward. So it says again, and Yeshua grew both in wisdom, that's the Greek word Sophia, and it means a broad and full understanding. And this is as it relates to everything from dream interpretation to understanding science. So he grew both in wisdom, learning, again, both mentally and emotionally. That's what wisdom means. And in stature, that means physically. So he got strong and grew in his physical body. And again, because it said here how he grew, a baby can grow in inches, but not necessarily grow in health. So this has to do with that it takes work to grow in health as well. Gaining favor, that's the Greek word charis, and it means grace, grace that affords joy. Gaining favor both with other people, that is socially, and with God, and that means spiritually. And again, this is Luke 2:52. This is the complete Jewish version. So Yeshua grew physically, mentally / spirit or emotionally, spiritually, and socially. Now we're born and we grow and we mature. And this kind of growth requires a work. So we don't just sit back and let this kind of growth happen to us. There's a work involved, this imagery of beating it forward. It just doesn't just happen to us. So let's break this down. We grow in wisdom, meaning mentally, emotionally, and that involves an IQ, if you're familiar with that term, intellectual quotient, and EQ, you're probably familiar with that as well. That's how to process your emotions in a healthy way, emotional quotient. Physically, and that is KQ, kinetics quotient. So that means our ability to move our body. And by the way, this has actually been diminished with technology. Now, there's probably some people in our group that do have a good KQ, like Aaron, like Jules, anyone who's maybe on Broadway or dancers or whatever. But that is a thing, physically, KQ. Spiritually is the other area, that's spiritual quotient. And socially, which is a social quotient, how we understand and relate to others. And we see here that Jesus grew in those 4 areas. This is maturing. The stages are of growth, of development. Tonight, we're going to really look at spiritual maturing. So I'm going to kind of use a mashup with predominantly Ken Wilber, who's a philosopher and an author, and James Fowler, who's a pastor, a Methodist pastor, an author, and a theologian. But there are actually numerous models of spiritual development with varied names from everyone from monastic priests to theologians, okay? So they're all over the place. These stages are often seen in parallel with our actual aging as humans. In other words, sometimes these stages are referred to as infant stage or adolescent stage or young adult stage. And sometimes it is connected with our world history, like when we go back to cavemen or the Dark Ages or whatever. It can be connected to world history as well. Tonight, we'll talk through the first 3 of the 6 stages we'll be looking at. And oftentimes, people give these stages colors to identify them. So when they use them on charts and things, they give them colors. And so, which I've done that tonight. So we're going to kind of use those in the background. So we begin with an egocentric stage, stage 1 actually, and this is just a beige, as you can see, kind of imagery of this center stage. So this is a egocentric me stage, and these are the first 2. The very first stage is archaic or primal, and again, that's usually connected with a beige color. This means a basic existence. So imagine a cave person or an infant, right? It's a very primal stage in the spiritual stages. It's connected to survival. The center of gravity is actually preservation. This stage is often irrational. If you've ever seen a baby cry out of hunger or been a mother and tried to nurse your baby, and the baby is crying so hard because the baby is hungry, but the child can't nurse because he's crying so hard that he can't nurse. This would be an example of that archaic or primal action. It's about basic instinct. However, it doesn't have a lot of logic. It doesn't, hey Beth, good to see you. Great to have you with us. So it doesn't have logic. So archaic primal is without logic. The capacity for logic, for reasoning, and for spirituality is not there. Again, for instance, let's use a baby again. When operating in this stage, will move its head when a blanket or a pillow covers its face, right? But a baby doesn't have the cognitive ability to be able to say, let me see what is good about this blanket on my face. Why did my mom maybe put a blanket over my face? Maybe mom put it over my face to protect me from the smoke of the bus that's driving by. Or maybe it's very cold out and she's trying to protect my lungs from that cold blast. No, baby doesn't think like that. Baby only thinks, I can't breathe, I'm going to die, this is a threat, and moves its head to get the blanket off of its face. This is the archaic primal stage in spiritual growth. And again, this is me-centered. This is egocentric. By the way, let me just qualify. All of these stages are important. They are all needed, and we incorporate them into our journey. Even once we go through them, they stay with us. We need the primal instinct somewhere in our operating system, right? For obvious reasons. For instance, you hear a crash, what do? You cover your head, right? That's a good instinct to have, actually. So like several of our congressional leaders. Yeah, exactly, Jim. Absolutely. Yes. So this would be archaic and primal. Okay. And when we get that, we kind of get why people do what they do. Now, not many of the people in our world are in this stage, but it is the first part. It is me or egocentric. Okay. The second part is magic or intuitive. And it is the color purple. Usually purple is connected to it. When they put it on all the charts, they always say it's purple. It's also egocentric, me focused. Now, this is like young children who follow the beliefs of their parents. They tend to imagine angels and religious figures in scripture as characters in fairy tales. It's actually why Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy are so easily integrated into Western Christianity, right? In this stage, everything is magical. The thinking in magic intuitive is if you work this right, you can control your world, which is you. You are at the center of the world. Now, let me give you a couple examples of that. I just want to make sure, blindly following, Jim Barrow was saying, yeah, we're going to get into blindly following, Jim, in the third one. Absolutely, there's a part of that. So with this, in Mark 9, at this second stage, which is magic intuitive, in Mark 9, when they didn't think Yeshua could hear him, as they walked, the disciples argued about which one of them should be considered the greatest. Now, that would be magic intuitive. They discerned that Jesus was something supernatural, something special, something magical. And they felt, they intuited, I want to be part of this. And so they argued about which one of them was the greatest so that they could kind of be the closest. Again, me, egocentric, this second one. Mark 10, on another occasion, the mother of James and John had come to Yeshua to ask that her sons could sit on his right and in the kingdom. Again, this is the magic intuitive stage. Magic intuitive has practices that can be used to get you what you want. In ancient times, this would be a sacrifice to the rain gods. In more recent times, this may look like snake charmers. You know, there are actual churches where people get together and pick up poisonous snakes, and this would definitely be magic intuitive. They would pick up snakes, they take that verse out of context about how they wouldn't be killed by it. They would pick up snakes and they would handle them, snake handlers, in their church service. And if you had enough faith, this snake wouldn't kill you. Or here's another example of this magical intuitive. Opening up churches in a pandemic because we have got to go to a building to worship God who we want to make happy. And since he's happy with me going to a building we will call church, he will protect me from the virus. Now, we've seen that, haven't we? We know what this looks like. When countered with science or logic or consideration for others, magic intuitive says, this is going to sound familiar, that's not what I think, that's not what I feel. Again, egocentric, cannot see the world through another point of view. There's only one right way to view the world. That's the way I see it, right? That's me. To take the perspective of another is not going to be on the table here. Egocentric, magic intuitive is not going to learn through logic. Now, have you had that when you're talking with people who are here, who are in this purple group, right? Magic intuitive. You thought to yourself, well, okay, yeah, they're saying they feel that, they think it's irrational. Maybe if I just give them the facts, they'll see it. And then you're like, the facts aren't seen for some reason. And hopefully now you kind of have an inclination of why that could be. Because magic intuitive will not learn through logic. Let me give you an example of what this looks like practically. The egocentric child who's in this developmental stage plays hide and seek, right? They play hide and seek, and when they get really excited, they hide their eyes and they think you can't see them, right? That's this. That's magic intuitive. That's me, egocentric. I'm going to hide my eyes and then you won't be able to See me. That's the magic intuitive in action. And again, this is impulse driven. It is because I think it is. It is because I want it to be. It's all about doing something to make the powers give you what you want. Aaron is saying these two feel like they translate into transactional faith. Yeah, very easily, because it's about rewards rather than service. Yes, and when we get to the next one, it's even more so. But yes, absolutely, transactional faith is definitely very much at the cornerstone here. Jim says, well, it sounds like we grow out of it, but retain some remembrance of it. Absolutely. Most theologians and spiritual philosophers believe that all of this, and I kind of co-sign on that too, is it's important. It's not like one is wrong. It's just like, that's why I'm kind of like connecting it with children, because it's not like one of these phases or stages is wrong. It's just that we grow out of it. So it's important that we connect to magic. There's supernatural in that. There's something special in that. But I'm going to get into why that may not be healthy in a bit. But let me give you another example of what this magic intuitive looks like. Again, the magic part is to get me what I want. And it's very connected to, this is what I think, this is what I feel, this is what I'm sensing. I knew someone who knew someone, this is actual story, that was selling their house. And they had a dream where a voice spoke to them and told them that they were going to win the lottery. And when they woke up, this dream was very real. And so when they sold their house, this is a true story, when they sold their house, they bought a cajillion lottery tickets with all the profit that they had on their house, even though everyone tried to talk them out of it and tried to give them logic. They had some crazy formula about how high the percentage would be if they used all their profit to buy lottery tickets, and they had this voice tell them that they were going to win. And so they took all their money from their house and they bought lottery tickets with it. They did not win. I mean, it's sad, but this is a perfect example of magic intuitive. They want the supernatural. They want the magic. They want what they want. It's me-centered. It's egocentric. They're at the center of the world, and then they intuit how they're going to be able to work that magic to get what it is that they want. It's why there are people dying right now of COVID. I'm sure you've read this, while they're refusing to believe it's COVID-19. They would rather believe it's cancer, nurses are saying, than COVID-19. That's this. It can't be COVID-19. Again, I feel it's not. Now, again, all stages are important because, and this one connects you to something bigger than yourself, something supernatural even. But because you're focused on the me and it's egocentric, it makes everything about you, and because it's intuitive, your worldview and everything that you view is out of your own intuition without any checks and balances, which is why we don't stay there, right? It's why it's not a good idea to stay there. Hey, Evelyn, good to see you, honey. Shabbat Shalom. So again, what moves us through to this next stage? Oftentimes, with this one, what moves us through is a connection with others in such a way that it shifts your worldview. I always tell white people who, quote, aren't racist and don't understand why people of color are so angry, to befriend people of color and listen to them. Listen to their stories. Don't tell them they're wrong when they share their experiences. Actually ask them to tell you what they've experienced in their life. For me, when I was able to get out of this pretty quickly was when I moved to a mission, to do mission work in Brooklyn. And my husband and I were pastors there, and we lived in a very marginalized community in Bushwick, Brooklyn in the late 80s, early 90s, and to mid 90s, well, actually to late 90s. And there was a lot of really good people that had horrible things happen to them in their life. Hey, a formula didn't work. There was no magic for them. It did not change anything. There was such a thing as victimization. It truly was not their fault. It was one group of people that marginalized and controlled another group of people. And unless that system changed, the people in the controlled group were usually powerless to do anything without some sort of help from others. So see, when we see these kinds of things and experience these kinds of things, that shifts us out of, stay up there, that shifts us out of this one. So now we go from egocentric to ethnocentric, or us. So we go from me to us. And we look at the third one, which is mythical, literal. Mythical, literal. So again, others are evaluated in this on what we believe is right or true. Are you following me? Others are evaluated on this in this area by what we believe is right or true. And mythical literal is usually red. So here's where Aaron and who else? Jim was saying this as well. That this is where this really comes into play. A person responds to religious stories and sacred rituals in a literal way, okay, when they read or experience it. The Bible, the sacred texts are all taken literally. Now, some are meant to be taken literally, like treating others as you would like to be treated, or feeding and caring for those in need. But others are about the Hebraic style of storytelling to impart a spiritual truth for practical application, right? Jim is saying, so mythical could be described as my experience must be your experience as well. Yeah, but let me just drill down on that a little bit, Jim. It's actually my doctrine must be your doctrine as well, even if you don't experience it. So it's actually kind of, we move from intuition, right, where we feel things, to literal. The mythical is literal, meaning it's what we believe over even what we feel, if you're tracking with me on that, okay? This stage is usually accompanied by a strong belief in authority, who has been put in that position by God. Hello. This is even going to ring more true with us. Always using scripture in this, mythical literal. And again, this is us, or ethnocentric. This is the tribe, the group. Always using scripture, usually and often out of context. Let me give you an example of that. Trump as a Bible character. Have you ever read this crap? Trump as a Bible character who was chosen by the Lord to be in this office in order to save and preserve Christianity. Right? That's this. Mythical, literal, ethnocentric. It's about us, our tribe. Prophecies, which you may have read before the election, about that he would have a second term. And then, follow this, when he lost the popular vote, as well as he'll lose the electoral vote, it was rigged, or it was a conspiracy, or it was demonic. Of course. There are always a lot of attempts to explain God's plan and one's purpose in this stage. It looks like this. Jesus died for your sins. Believe that and go to heaven. End of story. If you don't believe in Jesus, straight to hell. All of those Jewish people who do not believe at this time that Yeshua is the Messiah, eternal hell for them if they die. But wait, what about the covenant that Adonai made with them, and even with Ishmael for that matter, and the fact that he himself says he never breaks covenants? The mythical, literal, tribal response would be, nope, everything is erased with the New Testament. Wait, even what God said could not be erased is erased? Yes, it's all under the curse. Right? You've heard it. God created the earth in 7 literal days. If you believe the Bible, you believe this. Maybe you've heard this one. The Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it. This is often connected to an animating myth. In other words, with this mythical literal, it's often connected to one or more animating myths, like a holy war between good and evil. That sounds like exceptionalism maybe in the US, doesn't it? To doubt any of it will bring you outside of the safe tribe. There's a strong emphasis on linear right and wrong, on doctrines and belief in those doctrines, of being part of the correct tribe that believes the right things. Now let me see what y'all have to say. In my history class the last 2 weeks, Barika, what are you saying? Oh, Christian Zionism. Yeah. Very, very true, Barika. Great point. I'm judging this mindset, but I'm also this mindset here to say, that's good. That's fantastic, Aaron, because again, hopefully it will be a mirror. I've been getting teasers to how this mythical literal beliefs have affected American. That's cool, post-Vietnam. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Barika. Michelle is, wait, does this mean I'm not a heretic? Yes, it simply means that the people calling you a heretic are stuck in the red zone. This is why they probably call it this, right? The red zone. It means that's where they end. But when you understand this is where they are, then you kind of get why they do what they do, right? And why they think like what they think. Again, this is all about the doctrine, believing the right things. And before we get all crazy and say, how could they think that? Hey, I was that, like Aaron admitted too. I was that big time. When I first came into faith, my husband and I got into this church doctrine that was very much like focused on revelation and end times. And we had a big, bad, evil enemy in this world. United States was chosen and separate and holy and set apart unto God. And there was an enemy that threatened the chosen nation, and it was called secular humanism. That sounds so funny. This was like almost 40 years ago. But secular humanism, and there was all kinds of books written about end times and rapture and what secular humanism does and how evil the press is and the media and everybody is trying to brainwash you, and we're trying to push God out of our nation where he belongs. I was in the red zone, friends. So again, we all kind of go through these stages, these phases, the rapture doctrine, absolutely. So we all go through these phases, these stages, right? And there's parts of them that, in other words, there's conceptual parts that we can keep as part of them, but we keep growing past them. N.T. Wright refers to this kind of faith with all these tenets as bricks. And he also says, we use these bricks to throw at people's heads, which we do. It's brick wall Christianity. In other words, you build a wall with these bricks. They love walls, don't they? We build a wall with these bricks and it keeps us safe. The problem with building a Christian wall with tenets that are bricks is that when one of those things no longer works, the whole damn wall falls down. And then what happens is people say, oh my gosh, nothing works. And that's right where the Lord is going to meet you. That's when we can move past. We're going to talk about that next week. Conflicts that occur in this zone when one's beliefs are challenged are often ignored because they represent too much of a threat to one's faith-based identity. Characterized by conformity, this group is an acceptance of belief with little questioning of such belief, which is why science can be so mistrusted by those in this mythical literal stage. Because science changes, doesn't it? It's fluid, not static. To the mythic literalist, truth never changes, which is why science is rejected. One day they think this, one day they think that. Thank God, they keep learning, right? But that doesn't sit well with a mythic literalist. Mythic literalism is what most Western Christians are in. One's identity stays only with one's group. Again, very tribal. This group is the correct group, and it is chosen and protected. Us versus them. We have the one true God. The them are the infidels. This is fundamentalism. This is zealot. Most terrorist acts we see today are committed by mythic literal thinkers. Language like behead people who count votes and put them on polls for all to see are terroristic threats, aren't they? Why aren't they seen that way? Well, because to the mythical literalist who's in the us ethnocentric world, this is war language. This is good versus evil. We often see a leader rise up and say, "Follow me, I can tell you what to do that will protect you." This stage is why someone would drink bleach because the president referred to it at a news conference. It's not just that they're stupid. I know people say that, but that's not what it is. It may be, but it's not only what it is. It's that they are mythical literalists. And these are often, usually, one-issue voters. You can't be a Christian and vote for Biden because abortion is murder. Boom, end of story. Again, this mythical literalist. This spiritual stage will always be brimming with inconsistencies and contradictions. And I know that's what makes us all our head explode. But those inconsistencies and contradictions are never seen or acknowledged in this group. Like the concept of pro-life. Is it pro-life? Is that what the policies and practices are? Or all lives matter? Do they? They are usually told what the issue is by their tribal leaders. And anything that challenges it is an attack on our religious way of life. This is the king in Israel scenario. We want a king to be protected and to not be different. Tribal leaders will protect us, and we will do whatever they tell us to do. There's a call to sacrifice for the greater good. But a manipulator uses words like sacrifice, but has no personal experience with it at all. They will use the common core values without any personal application to those values. But the mythical, literal people in this group cannot see beneath. Literal thinkers cannot see layers. They are very one-dimensionally focused. Sacrifice for the tribe, the good of the tribe. And this is to deny personal impulse for the good of the mission. Western churches are this model. It's the animating story of sacrifice for the win. And again, remember, this stage isn't necessarily wrong or bad. It can just become perverted and twisted. But we all need to go through this stage, relate to this stage, but keep on moving. Let me see what you all say. Also, if you're in the in crowd versus an outlier, the strength of their community dictates the level of their mystical belief. Oh, so true. Right. It's very much how that their identity is through the strength of their community. Absolutely. Jim is saying tunnel vision believers. That's a good description. Yep, good description, Jim. Absolutely. Beth is saying it's more like stages of development. They kind of mirror psychological stages of. They do, Beth, like Piaget and all that. Absolutely, I agree. Alexandra is saying, I'm curious how you think it would be best to connect with magic, intuitive, mythical, literal. They don't learn response. I feel like there are a few people in my life. Yeah. I'm going to get into that probably next week a little more, but I truly feel that connecting them to real people and real people's stories is our best hope in that, with this especially, and definitely with this. But with this, sometimes a literalist needs something a little more impactful. I'm going to get into what happened to somebody in a minute with this. Most philosophers believe that the majority of people do not go any farther than this, which is a real bummer, right? But how does one move to the next level from tribalist literalism on? Oftentimes, it takes an encounter, something that you are open enough to experience, even though it challenges everything that you believe is solid. In Acts chapter 9, I'm going to read some scripture here. It says, meanwhile, Shaul, still breathing murderous threats against the Lord's Talmudim, that means disciples, went to the Kohen Hagadol, that's high priest, and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, authorizing him to arrest any people he might find, whether men or women who belonged to the way, and bring them back to Jerusalem. So here's the scenario. These were followers of the way, right? Followers of the teaching of Jesus. And Paul was asked for permission to go stalk these people, to seek them out, to hunt them down, and to bring them into prison. And there was a whole, we talked about this with the dehumanization, but there was all kinds of atrocities done to people that were followers of the teaching of Jesus. And Paul was stalking them, searching for them, and bringing them in. So the text goes on and says, he was on the road and nearing Damascus when suddenly a light from heaven flashed all around him. Here's what we need to pray, Alexandra. Suddenly a light flashed all around him. Falling to the ground, he heard a voice saying to him, Shaul, Shaul, why do you keep persecuting me? Sir, who are you? He asked. I am Yeshua, and you are persecuting me. This is what needs to be heard. What you do to the least of these, you do to him. This is what needs to be experienced. The text goes on, but get up, and go into the city, and you will be told what you have to do. The men traveling with him stood speechless, hearing the voice but seeing no one. They helped Shaul get off the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. So leading him by the hand, they brought him into Damascus. For 3 days he remained unable to see, and he neither ate nor drank. So here he was fasting, and he isolated himself, which deals with this, the me and the egocentric. Paul was deeply entrenched in the mythic, literal, tribal stage. As a Pharisaical zealot, he was an extremist in his religious group. He believed that all religious practices outside of his code would delay the rise of Zion, the Messiah coming to raise Jerusalem up as the center of the world's salvation. By any means necessary was his way. But because of an encounter and subsequently spending 3 years learning in the Arabia, he emerged with transitioning into number 4 stage and beyond, which we'll get into next week. For a genuine move to stage 4 to occur, there must be an interruption of reliance on hierarchical external sources and a new trust of listening to and following one's own open heart. Trusting that this is where God is speaking to you and this is how God is leading you. Now, this transition can be really scary because all of your preconceptions that you give you the illusion of security and predictability are completely taken away. But it is imperative that this happen to keep us moving on. One of the quotes I want to think about during this time, which is really beautiful and powerful, is by James Fowler. And it's said about Christian theological ethicist, you probably heard me quote, Richard Niebuhr. He writes, Richard Niebuhr likens faith to a cube. From one angle of vision, he points out, the observer can see and describe at least 3 sides of the cube. But the cube has backsides, a bottom, and insides as well. Several angles of vision have to be coordinated simultaneously to do any real justice in a characterization of faith. I'm going to post that for you. It's such a powerful quote. Ken Wilber uses the term conveyor belt as a necessity in the growth awakening process. That religious faith community groups should be offering a conveyor belt to people. In other words, we are encouraging people to move along by giving them something that they can step onto that will move them. And so hopefully all of us are on this conveyor belt together. Before I close, and wow, this was a long one, I'm just wanting to make sure I'm getting everything. Copying Aaron's question because it has me confused as well. Sorry, I missed that question, Aaron. Jim just copied. I'm confused on how to relate to these stages. Is it like stages of grief where you can move from one to the other and jump around? Or are these stages that you progress through linearly? Great question. Yes, you can have regression from time to time, for sure. But it's not necessarily like the stages of grief, which you can pop over to anger and skip the denial and then get back to denial. It definitely is linear and that this is building, okay? So you are not going to go from here to here and then have to go back to here. This is definitely linear in this way. But sometimes we regress a little, right? When we get into trouble, when we have things kind of knock us off our footing, sometimes we can digress, and oftentimes then we may land here. I've seen people that have done a lot of work and growth. They've had a lot of movement, and then something happens and they go right back to their dogma, their rigid dogma. And I'm going back to this model, and because I felt comfortable there and I could explain everything and everything made sense to me. So when we're in these 3, sometimes it's tempting to go back here, this tribalism, right? But we can't skip steps, if that makes sense to you, if you're following me on that. Is it possible to say that some portion of our life are in one stage while another might be farther down the... That's a great thought. I think so, right? Because we are dimensional. And we could have certain parts of our emotions or faith up here and then certain down here. Yeah, I think so, Jim. Absolutely. I agree with that. Hey, Neats, good to see you, honey. So, again, this was a longer one. Shabbat Shalom to everyone. And next week, we will get into these 3. If you have any thoughts or questions, again, I post this in the members group. And if you want to read through it just to kind of get more insight, I invite you to do that. If you have any thoughts or questions, you can pop that on the page and we will revisit a little bit next week and then pick up on this last 3. But hopefully we will get some greater insight into where people are and greater understanding as to why they think, do, and not do what they're doing. So hopefully it enlightens us. Shabbat Shalom.